from the Central European time, which I realise could be any time of the day around the world. And I welcome you to the question time that we have this morning. So just to let you know how we will make this work, if you have any questions, we would love to hear from you. So please put them into the question and answer, and we will do our best to put them to Dominique and Edmundas, and the same for the other people later on this morning. My name's Rosie Mayglothling. I'm the chair of the Competitive Commission, and I'm going to manage the question time. And we already had a few questions come in, and also being a curious coach, I have my own questions I'd like to ask as well. So I'm going to start, and this is one to both of you, and I don't mind who goes first. It was really, I thought the two presentations complemented each other extremely well, because Edmundas, you spoke a lot about the planning of it, the vision of it, and how you arrived at delivering the vision. And Dominique, you spoke a lot about the practicalities of it, and how on a day-to-day basis, a little bit more, we need to be communicating clearly with our coaches, with our athletes rather, and we need to probably change the way that we, the dialogue we have with our athletes as well. But one thing both of you talked about was juniors. And Edmundas, you said you moved from a system where you chose big athletes and took them to camps in the south of the country. And yes, you moved to where you had them performing on the water. And Dominique, you talked about having a system where you had a lot of dropout. So if we start with Edmundas, did it mean that you had a different type of athlete? Were they smaller athletes? If they had performance on the water, did they stay in the sport for longer? So how did that actually work for you as a federation?
In reality, in those long years, what we realized when we were working in a so-called old system, first of all, choosing tall and big athletes, and after training them and developing, dropout and losers of athletes during time were bigger. When we started to select just motivated, who are fast on the water, who are motivated to train, this type of athletes, they stay longer. One thing we should remind that whatever we do, anyway, natural selection will exist. Usually in selection regattas, big athletes win more often than small ones. This is happening. So anyway, we are going to the same direction. But one of the biggest examples of those periods, it is our women's double, where especially famous Donata, Olympic medalist and world champion, was completely, when she was a junior, not meeting any criteria of anthropometrics. Small, light, and just reminding, in 2012-13, she was B finalist in Olympic Games, European champion in open weight category in single scull, and in the same year, European champion in lightweight on ergometer. So really showing that we should select motivation and performance, but not kind of future promising criteria.
Okay, so you found for you that their personal motivation is much more of a driver for them and for staying in the sport. Yeah.
Yes, okay. Correct.
Thank you. And Dominique, I wanted to ask you, you also spoke about the dropout from juniors, and junior, how much correlation do you feel there is, or between those that do well as juniors and those that do well as seniors? So do the ones that do well as junior performers always come through to perform at senior level? Or is there a natural dropout because they realise they don't have the talent to go on? Sorry, that's a bit complicated question. I hope it's okay.
Okay, so I've told that I'm not having a crystal ball or a magic window. I thought that we must have some solution to curb this phenomenon. So during my my presentation, I speak about the different factors of the resignation, of the abandonment. You remember, I speak about a recurring factor is the studies, because this is the most common reason given related to the difficulty of reconciling training on the higher education course. Everybody knows that. Another factor is the relationships management. It's about the relation dynamics, relation between the rowers and the coach. Another factor is about the management of training, the planning. Another factors I speak about insufficient level of progress on performance of the athletes. When the results are not good, athletes feel that they are not good, which is never pleasant nor rewarding. I speak about also social reason, and and then now about your question, maybe I'm not exactly the solution, but I speak. I think a better educational training for coaches is important to improve the communication with the athletes. I spoke also a better support for coaches. I spoke also about to work with the youngest on the mental preparation, and I think also it will be a good solution to sharing of experience with coaches who have a lot of experience and who have a good result.
Okay, so I think what I'm trying. So what I'm hearing from Edmundas is that highly motivated people who push themselves as juniors are more likely to make it as seniors. And I know from some other federations that they feel the success at under 23 is a better determinant, or better, it shows better who will make it as a senior rower. So my question to you is, as a junior, have some of them reached their full potential in terms of internationally as a junior, or do you feel they all can go on to be successful seniors?
Theoretically, all they can go on to be successful seniors, but what we must have in mind, and one of issues is really communicate with the juniors at early times. First of all, explaining them that this is long journey to become a senior successful. Another, to get information, because what we see, I think in every country, that a lot of young kids, very successful international juniors, even don't have a plan to become a senior athlete. They're planning to be active in sports when they're in school, and after start serious studies and change their life completely, going to professional work. So just to know, good to communicate, good to explain that this is okay. Everyone has own rights to live his own life. But on the same time, plan in advance and really explain that achievements in junior is just first basics for the future.
Okay. Dominique? You're on mute at the moment.
Okay. During my my presentation, I have two questions. The first one that seems to me essential is it was how to return our club's practitioner, our club's licensee to VLIT. And the question number two, is there any logic in holding back young people when they don't want to? If they already want to leave, it is because the game is partly lost, and that certain things upstream have been forgotten. This thing who has been forgotten is maybe all the factors that I speak in my presentation. So I'm convinced that it's all these different factors, studies, coaching, relationship coach, social reason are the difficult. We must find a solution about this the different factors.
So a lot of your you talked a lot about the need for coaches to change the way they communicate with their athletes as well.
Yes, it's the reason I speak in my presentation about the difference between the generation. You know, when we speak baby, the baby boom, baby boomers. So it's not the reason it's very difficult for a coach. Is a coach is a coach is the educational of the coach is not very good. It's very difficult for a coach now to work with this new generation because the generation of today is not the same, but the generation of yesterday's.
Okay.
I think it's a principal difficulties for the coach. Sorry, it's not very easy for me to translate. I think.
Okay, but so yeah, so what you're saying is that the coaches need to be adaptable, and they need to manage to speak to today's generation and not yesterday's generation.
Sorry, Rosie.
So the coaches need to be adaptable, and they need to be able to speak to today's generation and not yesterday's generation. So they have to adapt with as the young people evolve and the different generations that come.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. It is a reason I propose in my conclusion of my presentation. I try to find. It will important to reform the coaching support of coaches by strengthening cooperation and exchanges at the international level. Remember, I propose to create a school with the international framework.
Yeah, and that was also, I think, about giving the athletes the opportunity to maybe go and study in a different country and to see the whole thing of not just the sport, but the culture and travel and everything else that went with that as well as being an important part of being an athlete. That you were also suggesting that as well. So I think you said culture, travel, and campuses around the world all being involved was an important, you saw as a real, yes, could be a game changer for.
Okay, yes, Rosie, sorry. Yes, in my proposal, I say that young people, we know that the young people are hyper connected in order to bring them on more international vision that will combine sport, culture, travel. And I propose that I would like to see the organization of international summer university support by FISA, by different federations and campuses around the world, which will combine sporting and academic excellence on the all supervised by rowing expert. I remember Erasmus program. So, and the exchanges during workshops would allow this category to shed light on their vision of tomorrow's rowing in order to know their needs. Because when were they asked to this generation, it was one of my proposals. It's an idea. Maybe we can discuss about this idea.
Okay, thank you. And Edmundas, if for you and your athletes, or for your coaches and your athletes, do you feel that exchanges, the culture, the environment around that is also important for keeping the young people in the sport?
Yes, of course. Of course, it is very important because new generation communication, especially communication area, puts as the first priority in their life. So they're looking for different ways of communication with different countries, different cultures, and on the same time with different communities inside country. Yes, it's extremely important. And one of advices to the coaches, because most of them are very experienced in coaching and rowing, but in communication with new generation, successful are those who are finding support even inside country, in federation, with other specialists, psychologists, people who are on the board of federations but successful in business and other areas. And they have a lot of stories to tell to athletes and motivate them to go further.
Okay, so you also talked about using business within your planning for your when you started. You didn't just turn to sports, you turned to business as well to look at how you were going to set out your vision and plan.
Yes, because reality in life is we believe that a lot of things what coaches are doing are very special. But in my personal experience, what I found out outside rowing, that a lot of techniques with what coaches are using in training are used in companies to motivate people, to organize business processes in the way how coaches are organizing training process and vice versa. So experiences from business and other activities. I'm not talking only commercial business, other activities, culture, social activities can be taken into the rowing, can really bring a lot of advantages to the coaches.
Okay, thank you. And I had one other thing I wanted to ask you, Edmundas, and you talked yesterday and you said, sorry, not yesterday, in your presentation, you spoke about the fact that you put a date on your, so you said your plan was to go from 2004 to 2016. And you said you shouldn't have put a date on it.
Yes.
So how would you manage it if you were starting again? What would you change on that?
If we would start it again, it's our permanent dream. Whatever we do, could we start from the beginning, reload? We would just call it long-term strategy without putting a date. Because what is it putting a date? All we have anyway rowing mentality. And when we put 2000 meter mark, we know 2000 meters is finished. And life after race is starting. Same when you are putting a date and long-term strategy, you should know that 12 years, it's reality that not everyone who was starting will still be alive at the end of this journey. But those who are still alive and active, really believing that they're reaching finish. And we realized that continuation was difficult because too many people who were very creative at the beginning were telling that we reached what we wanted, we achieved what we wanted, why we should continue, everything is done. So that's why just to put long-term strategy and reload it every 4 years and have 12 years forward. This is much better.
Okay, so then I have a question for you, that you achieved great success in Rio with your 2 medals and your 5 boats, which I think was slightly more than you, not the medals, but the boat numbers were slightly more than you set out to achieve. So where are you going after that? Because you've got your success, as you say, for a lot of people, that was the goal and the vision. Have you created a new vision for the future, or is it to try to maintain the vision? So how are you going forward from 2016?
So this is what I mentioned, that this becomes difficulty. Again, it's not only in rowing, it's everywhere. If you are low performing, you have 2 ways, improve or die. When you after improvement, you have 3 ways. Go down, keep what is achieved, or improve further on. And this is really, we found difficulty, just mental, for the people to sit again together with the same enthusiasm and same power and decide and find a way where to go forward. So today I would say that we are on stage to maintain achieved.
Yeah.
So other goals, we're still in nice discussions, exchanging opinions, but we have difficulty to create something new, really impressive, like we did more than 12, almost 16 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. And I think what you've highlighted there is that to achieve the success is an exciting journey. But to have success after success is much often less thought about, but is equally important.
Yes, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And Dominique, I wanted to ask you a little bit about. You said that already in France you have a good system with study and sporting opportunities combined. Whether you could just talk a little bit about how that was managed by the federation and how that worked.
Yes, it's in France. You know, I work for the French Rowing Federation, but also for the French Swimming Federation. So I had some experience with two two federations, but I know also the system in the other federation because it's a sport ministry who manage all. So we try to improve, as we say, the fellow socio-professional system. It's a very important for us. We work with university, a different university. We try to have a contract with a different university, but it's not so easy. Huh? It depends of the studies. For example, if you want to become a doctor, if you want to do medicine, it's impossible to combine training on the studies. So we try to have a good relation with the Ministry of Sport Ministry and Sport of National Education, and it's a job with not this job is not very easy. But we have many contacts with university or the college. In France, we say college or college and lycée. College. On high school, sorry, college, high school, and the university, and so the relation with the different ministry is very important.
Okay, so what you're able to do is slightly tailor the education alongside the sport. Is that correct? That you have the ability to work with the universities to do that? Sorry, you're on mute. So.
Yes, it's about tailors. Yes, exactly. It's tailors, right? The contrast is different between robots and other robots. It depends. It depends of studies.
Okay. Thank you. And Edmundas, do you have a similar system for your older athletes? Are they able to combine study and training?
Yes, sure. This is only way how to keep them in sports, to give them possibility to have so-called other life. So we're in very tight contact with universities, and with each university where our national team members are studying, really taking care that they can combine and really continue studies and rowing at the same time.
Okay, and they manage that with. I mean, you have. You said in the winter it's quite cold, so presumably you go outside the country for training camps, and they can still manage studying alongside doing things like that.
Yes, and it's quite interesting nowadays what we realized this year. Some paths in combination studies and rowing will be even easier in nearest future. COVID taught us for distance communication and distance studying. Lectors and professors are used to go for distance lectures. So it means that even for athletes will be easier in future to study when they're in training camps, just because they will be able to connect from anywhere.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Dominique.
Maybe I have a precision about the studies. As rowing is, we know that as rowing is not a professional sport. Rowers have a right to study or learn a trade. We know that in some countries, being sport offers you a university entrance ticket and the facilities compatible with high levels training. But in other countries, in France, sometimes the first criterion is academic, and not specifically related to your sporting result. The facilities are minimal or non-exist. In Belgium, for example, it's very difficult. But if many university courses are I designed to enable top level sportmen or sportwomen to study on train. I still believe that this offer is not large enough, not sufficiently diversified, and that it does not always correspond to the aspiration of a sportman or sportwoman who regret it once their career is over. It's also a problem.
Okay, so what you're really saying is that whilst it works to a level at the moment, you'd like to see it extended and more offers to the young people in terms of their training and education.
Yes, well, the situation is not idealistic situation. It's a reason we must to work to improve the social professional system, because in the future, if we don't improve this system, I think it will be very difficult for young rowers, young sportmen or sportwomen. It will be more difficult for our talents to continue and to combine studies on the training. And we know in this context, it's already more difficult.
Okay, thank you. All right, and a final thought from both of you, if I may. So Edmundas first. What would be your advice to someone now who wanted to plan a long-term vision for the sport in their country? What would be your one piece of advice?
One piece of advice: if you are going to create long-term plan for your country, involve as many competences as possible. And this is not only for sports, for each and every. We know that business companies are inviting consultants agencies to support them to do planning. So what even I mentioned in my presentation, we have a lot of athletes, former athletes who now are successful and professional. So involve them into planning process. They will really support. They know planning techniques. They know planning methodologies, and they will support coaches to do it.
Thank you. And Dominique, what would be your final piece of advice to a coach to help them keep more under 19s in the rowing? Your one piece of advice.
Yeah. For the coach or for the rower? In my presentation, when I conclude, I said we work the supports provide to rowers, but by optimizing the social of the professional follow-up, by securing their career. I think it's very important, this term, this notion of security. So by securing their career over several years, and by encouraging more dynamic relationships.
Okay. So some more dynamic relationships and securing their careers over several years would be key.
Yes.
Okay, well, sadly, we've run out of time, but thank you both very much for presenting making your presentations, which were fascinating, and also for taking part in the live question time. And we look forward to seeing you carrying on and moving your countries forward in the coming years. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. For everybody now, there'll be a very short break of a couple of minutes, and then we will come back with our next group of questions and next group of people to answer those questions. So you have time very briefly to get a cup of tea and come back and join us. So thank you. And thank you to you too.
Thank you. Bye.
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 We can't hear you, Rosie. You're on mute.
Edmundas and Dominique, you're very welcome to stay and listen, but if you wouldn't mind muting and turning your cameras off, that would be great. Thank you. Clare, Sergio and Sheila, we're lovely to see you now.
Hi, Rosie. Morning.
Hi, Clare, how are you doing?
Good, good.
Okay.
I'm just going to try to improve my lighting situation here. Just a moment.
Yeah, you do look as if you're sitting in the gloom rather.
Hi, Sheila, Clare, Rosie, how are you?
Hey, hi, Sergio. Long time.
Yeah, I know. Wow. I think the last time was it in Lucerne? Maybe.
I think it was
wow.
Many years ago now, huh? It's crazy. Yeah.
It's funny how the same people keep cropping up, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can't kill me.
You don't want to.
No, I'll be right back trying to find some lighting for here. Just a moment.
What's your background there, Sergio?
So that's Leeds Beckett University, and that's our new £45 million building. So we are trying to really show it off as much as we can to see if we can recover some of that money back going forward.
It's fab.
Yeah, no, it looks amazing, really. I've only been there a couple of times, although it's been open now for nearly 6 months, unfortunately.
Okay, yeah.
But it's fantastic, really. Great teaching spaces, great social spaces, and great facilities. Really, it really is a state of the art.
Yeah.
And that bit at the top is a running track for testing, the square bit at the top. Yeah, and it goes well with the campus, because obviously our campus is very traditional, you know, an 1800s campus, and it fits in really well. So I'm very happy with that.
That's cool.
Looks good. Right, I hope you are ready, because we already have people on the line, so I think we should get started if you're all okay. And for those of you that have recently joined us, my name is Rosie Mayglothling, and I'm the chair of the Competitive Commission, and I'm going to manage this next 35 minutes with our three presenters. I would love for you to put some questions into the question and answer, which you'll find on the bottom of your screen on the Zoom. So you can just type it in, and we will try and make sure that we put them to our speakers, and we'll get them to answer them for you. But I'm going to start off with a couple of questions, and my first one is going to be to Sergio. And I was very interested in the study that you'd done with the serial winning coaches. And I know that you tried to get below the waterline, as you said. So you didn't want to just see what was on the surface. You wanted to really get deep down into the traits of the characters. And you interviewed some athletes as well. Were the athletes the successful athletes with the coaches, and did you manage to talk to people that have perhaps been in the scheme but hadn't been so successful or had maybe at some point come outside of the scheme, just in terms of the overall perspective on those coaches?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, really. And like with any research, there are limitations to what we did, really. At that time, we really wanted to focus on what seemed to work for these coaches. So when we spoke to the athletes, we spoke to athletes that had been successful with the coaches, because the main purpose of the study was to see what worked for a particular set of people, really. So completely appreciate that. If we had interviewed athletes that perhaps hadn't been successful with these coaches, we would have had a different story. So very mindful of that. But no, at the moment, we only interviewed those that had been successful.
Okay. And I also was wondering how much a coach could learn the skills that and the traits and the behaviors. So perhaps the behaviors, but the traits and self-management of these serial winning coaches.
I think a great deal, really. And if I can be completely honest, I'm speaking from experience. Since we did the research, I've kind of taken it to heart to see what I could get better at as a coach based on what I found out. And for me, were things like emotional control, because I can be quite passionate sometimes, and that gets the best of me. Or things like not trying to brush things under the carpet and be more proactive with problems. So while we all have our own, if you want, set points or preferred ways of doing things based on our personalities and things like that, I think there is huge scope for each of us to try and find out which areas we think we want to get better at and just work at them, really. Everything is work. Nothing happens by chance. So if you want to get better at something, you have to, and like I said, all these traits and ways of working of the serial winners, some of these things will come easier to you because that's quite close to who you are, and some others will need more work, but definitely you can improve on all of this.
Okay, so if where would you start if you were a coach? I mean, how would I determine how good I am at those various things?
I always say really that for us, one of the biggest findings really was, perhaps not a surprise really, but one of the things that came through the research most strongly was how much these coaches knew themselves, for good or bad, really. They were very self-aware, and they had a very clear idea of their philosophies and values and beliefs. So I would say that I would always start at that point, really. Know yourself and know what you stand for, know what your personal philosophy is, really, because everything is going to come from that, really. Your behaviors are going to be influenced by that, again, for good or bad. So if you don't know yourself, it's going to be tough to then really be able to help others. So I would always start by really questioning, what do I stand for? Who am I? And then that will lead me down other paths, really. But that for me is the beginning.
Okay, and so that's quite interesting, because you've a very nice segue into me asking Sheila some questions.
I've been taking notes because I found it very interesting what you've been saying, Sergio. I like it.
So Sheila, you talked with two of our Women's Sports Leadership Academy high performance coaches, mentees and mentors as part of your presentation. About their philosophy, and how important do you think that is in terms of our coaches and a good starting point for people?
Well, I think it is actually linking a bit, as you said, to what Sergio is saying, and what both pairs of Whistler HPC coaches, so the female coaches who are being mentored, all four of them came back to the theme of, sort of who they are and their vision and how it had evolved over the process of being involved in this project. I think that sort of better understanding themselves and what they stood for, I think it very much came out that it had, I think we have a tendency within high performance, which is understandable, to be okay, well, how are we getting the results? But actually the coaching philosophy, in order to be successful, seems to be more going into the process of, what are you actually, what is your vision? What are your values? And I think all four of them had the process. It wasn't just about a goal anymore. It was about the process. And I think that's moving to more some things that we'd explored at last year's coach conference around the transformational process that does require these coaches in this mentorship situation, but then maybe with the athletes to be asking more questions, engaging more in the whole person rather than just in the outcome, the deliverable.
Yeah. And for those of you that weren't there last year, there is a presentation from Jean Cote, which is on transformational coaching, which you should be able to access. And it's around developing the athlete as a whole person, not just as someone who's going to perform or who's just come to do your sport. So it's applicable to coaches at all levels.
And just something, if I can add, I think it was a theme that's come out, and I think it relates back to some of the things Sergio is saying and some of the other topics we're exploring right now with coaching and coaching philosophy. I think more and more we are actually starting to understand that if we talk about the dynamics between a coach and an athlete, there's some very good learnings from this, but it's actually about the dynamics of a coach as they interact with a coaching team, maybe as they're interacting with administration. So from my perspective, I've actually learned a lot being more on the administration side, but also I think coaching, you can see how it's not specific to one relationship. You can actually be applying it in all areas. And I found it very interesting, and I'm learning a lot, but also very beneficial. And I think, as Sergio had mentioned at the beginning, understanding who you are, and then applying, how do you improve within the context of a coaching situation, but maybe some other situations that can also be applied. Okay,
thank you. And Claire, you obviously on the beginning of a journey with a group of coaches. So what have you taken, and how are you looking at this philosophy with those coaches and developing them?
Yeah, it's funny, I suppose we're, like I set out in this path unaware of what Sheila was doing with the Whistler program, yet there's so many similarities in the outcome that we both came out with, I suppose. So we are doing virtual workshops, unfortunately, with COVID and everything, kind of around your personal development, and they've been once a month. And we've looked at that very same thing, kind of identifying your values, recognizing your strengths, and building your gravitas was kind of how we phrased it. And we've gotten a consultant who has worked across a number of sports and Olympic coaches to deliver this program, and then those personal development workshops. And I think it's resonated quite well with the coaches. I don't think it was something that they had come across before in developing their, like, as a coach, just within their own clubs. And I think it's given them a chance to kind of sit back and say, like, it's not all down to me understanding the technique to perfection or the physiology, but actually just understanding myself first. So I think it's helping them build their confidence around what they're trying to do. So yeah, and also during those workshops as well, we've brought in some other sports doing the same program, so triathlon, cycling, and boxing, and I think that's been quite good because they're developing that philosophy and understanding those values together with other coaches and recognizing then the similarities are the same. Yeah, so definitely a really important part of the program, I think.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting when you have a mix of people, and I mean, it's back to you, Sergio, in terms of you had, I think it was 15 different sports represented, something like that.
You catch me out there. I think it's 14 or 15. Yeah.
Yeah, and yet you had a lot of similarities across all of the different coaches.
Yeah, and I think the beauty really of what we found was that within, so all 17 coaches belonging to 14 or 15 different sports in 11 countries, they were all different. You know, they all had their own personalities and their own specific ways of doing things. But within that, there were still some clear, either two things, best principles of practice, really, if you want. So things that you have to look after. And then just they all described a number of situations that, regardless of the sport or regardless of your personality or where you live, you have to deal with. Okay, and there's no two ways about it, really. If you're in high performance sport, you have to deal with this. So here is how we go about it. And I think when we present the research to, and as I was saying in my presentation, everyone is different. It's not about being a copycat of anybody, because there are no magic recipes. But it is important that you understand that some of these things you have to deal with, and that here are some ideas as to how these very successful coaches went about it, really. And to me, if I can pick up on one of Sheila's points, because I thought it was really, really to the point, Sheila mentioned that this idea of knowing myself is not just about how I deal with my athletes, it's the fact that these coaches have to deal with a lot of other stakeholders. So, and that was really clear from the research, really, that coaches at this level have to manage up and manage down. And normally we're very comfortable managing down with assistant coaches and with the players or the athletes, but we are less comfortable managing up, because those people can actually fire us, basically, and you have to be careful how you do that. But again, these guys, the coaches that we interviewed, were always very strong about, no, you have to manage up, because the decisions that are made up there are going to impact on your performance and the performance of your team. So you have to be brave and manage it, because the reality is, if you don't manage that and you don't get good results, you're going to get fired anyway. So you may as well get fired trying to manage it. And that was really fascinating to see.
So that's quite a big, I mean, that came out as well, Clare, with Antonio talking and about the high performance environment, that it is about getting results. And yet we hear a lot recently about how results driven programs have created some quite toxic environments. So how do you think you're working with your coaches to get that balance?
I think just as women coaches coming in on the program, they're probably have maybe a good emotional awareness, like on how they work with other people, how they operate in their club environment. There's also a lot of the politics and trying to manage up or manage parents or that sort of thing, like that they have good level of experience with. I guess like putting them in a difficult situation to train that how you operate, you know, when you're under pressure, is a hard one to recreate in training. But I think there is aspects of it, sorry, actually, that now that I think about it, where you're one of the workshops is around working with the team that we hope to do next year. And I hope that like they're going to come into an environment within high performance, like when they go down to the National Rowing Centre, and very much feel like they're under the eye of the high performance director. They're there with the high performance coaches, and how they operate in that environment is going to be really important as well. They have to feel confident that they've got they're true to themselves, they understand their values, and that they're not afraid to ask questions, and that they can feel comfortable in that team. So I think it's important that I, even as the facilitator, kind of work with the high performance team as well before they come into that environment, and ensure that, you know, they need to give the coaches the opportunity to almost co-coach, you know, to really work at a level with the coaches there, that they're not just there to like quietly watch in the background, that they need to like integrate themselves into the team while they're on the occasions that they're in that environment. But yeah, I think it's probably something like if this program runs over a number of years. Like, you know, hopefully it won't end at the end of July. We want to build it as, let's say, a 3-year program even. I think it's something that probably needs to be built in a bit more, is like dealing with that team, like the working within the team. I mean, sorry, like team of coaches, high performance director. I think we'd need to incorporate a bit more kind of support and to encourage them and support them to manage that environment as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Sheila, in terms of, you've got a huge number of coaches around the world that you work with on a regular basis and support on a regular basis. So how about for you in terms of the creating the demands of excellence and demands of results against the environment? How do you see that being managed?
Just also, I think maybe building on what Sergio and what Clare have been saying, there's also, I think when you have a deeper talent pool of coaches, bringing in both the male and female coaches, you actually are then bringing in maybe some different skill sets that allow you to have a team that is, I don't want to say easier to manage, but when you have people who have different strengths and also are feeling comfortable enough to being like, this is a strength, this is a weakness, because coaching by its nature is a very, it's one of the few jobs that you will have where you put everything into the project, the athlete or the crew, in our case for rowing, but yet the deliverable, the result at the other end is actually out of your control the moment that they leave the dock. So I think working with the team that we have, and also because we're very much focused right now around building up for the next 4 to 8 years through the coaching education program, we've shifted to a lot of underpinning safety, safeguarding, but also one would almost say values. So I think by building up a team, but also for I think myself and the others working on this, we've also had to learn that you need to be giving all of the tools and all of the, also explaining the expectations very clearly so that you can empower these coaches or the people working in your team to go off and deliver. And then you also have to readjust that. In our case, we're asking them to deliver a certain standard, but we also know that in some of the places that our coaches might be working, they might not have access to some of the tools that, say, coaches in the UK or in France might have. So I think that going back to managing expectations, but then also giving a good two-way communication system where you're ready to listen and understand the situation these coaches have found them in, and then readjust expectations and deliverables. But yeah, so it's been an interesting process. I think it's ongoing, and I'm learning as much from the coaching philosophy aspect as I would from maybe management philosophy, because I think there's a lot of common themes. But
yeah, good, thank you. And Sergio, I think you also spoke about how, despite the fact that without exception, this group of high performance coaches worked a lot of hours and were very dedicated to what they did, they still managed to get some sort of life work balance. And I was really interested in that, because I you know, sometimes you see people that definitely don't get that right. So how did they manage it?
It's amazing, really, because I wasn't really expecting that to come through the research, really. My idea, and having been a high performance coach really at the national team level, was that these guys were going to be, and they are, don't get me wrong, 24/7, 365. But still within that, the reality of a high performance coach that has to put a lot of hours in and has to spend a lot of time away from home because you travel a lot. And particularly in some sports like rowing, where you are having training camps away from home and then competitions in, you know, the other side of the world, that they still emphasize the need to find some kind of balance. And the idea, I mean, the key word here is relative work balance. This is not a 9-to-5 job, as we all know. And it's within the constraints of not being a 9-to-5, how do you get some sense of balance? And again, it's different for everybody, but two strategies really main. One, how do you keep in touch with your circle of family and friends, really, and how do you fulfill those relationships? How do you not lose track of those? So you have to find a way to do that, really. And interestingly, really, out of the 17 coaches, 16 of them were married with children, and they had been married with children for over 30 years. So they have found a way to make it work. Okay. And of course, that might also be down to their partner, okay, and their partner being special enough to be able to withstand that kind of a commitment, really. But managing your personal life in terms of so when you are away, how do you keep in touch? And when you are not away, when you are actually at home, how do you manage to be present? How do you get rid of the mobile phone? How do you turn off the computer? How do you try to actually provide some quality time for them and for yourself as well? Because that's the other thing, that the work-life balance, the second element is, how do I get the me time? Okay, how do I regenerate, and how do I keep myself energized and healthy? And I mean that in the most serious possible way, because you have to stay healthy as a coach. If you're not healthy, how are you going to look after anybody else? And they were talking about whether you are away or at home, sleeping properly as much as you can. And if you're not a good sleeper, then find ways to improve that. Might be through better working routines, might be that you have to start doing some meditation or whatever it is, but you have to find a way to sleep and regenerate, to exercise. Find, and all these guys were pretty strong on this idea of exercising. And so sleeping, exercise, and just general switching off at times. So yeah, again, this is very unique, and it has to work for you. And back to the point I was making earlier about how can you learn to do these things? Again, this is one area that has been really important to me personally. I'm a bit of a workaholic, like most coaches. And I work at the university, and I coach, and I've got a family. I've got two children, and I've had to find something that I think works for me. And it wouldn't work for anybody else, okay? But I think it works for me and for my family at this point. And I always have to, again, maybe another piece of advice, you might have to go and check with your wife or your husband or your partner, is this working? Because it might be working for you, but not for them. And we keep going back to this idea of being self-aware, because at the end of the day, this idea of regeneration and refreshing is again about being self-aware. Am I burning out? Am I feeling? Can I feel the signs of, gee, I need a good night's sleep, or gee, I need some quality time away from the sport? Yeah.
And I guess if you're going to be a serial winning coach, you have to take that into account, because otherwise you wouldn't be there long enough to be.
You have to last.
Yeah.
It's the key condition to be a serial winning coach. You have to be in the game for long enough.
Yeah. Okay, so Sheila has got a question for you, Sergio.
Okay.
No, it was really resonating with me, some of the things you've said, and I was thinking back actually to a couple of situations I've seen, and I was just wondering if you encountered this in your research, where coaches have moved, because some of the high performance coaches, at least within rowing, there's frequently, especially after an Olympic cycle, there's this whole rotation and moving. And the thing that I really admire, but I also can see it's such a challenge, and I wonder if it was the same for your coaches that that were in your study, is if you're moving every 4 to 8 years and you have to uproot your family, how were the coaches navigating that? Because that sort of balance, or I've seen some coaches roll up in a new country and they have to recreate themselves in their network. So how are these serial winning coaches navigating that? Because it's actually a really destabilizing factor, but I'm curious.
Yeah, no, we had lots of examples of that, really. And I guess it goes into camps. I think we saw people that what they did is they just took the whole family with them, and hopefully the family adapted, but they always traveled together as a unit, as a family unit. Okay. And I think that's easier. I mean, this happens in every industry, right? When people get moved to another country, it's easier when the children are younger. As they get older, and I think this is something that we don't sometimes take into account enough. But But I think more and more coaches and athletes are making the decisions about where they coach or where they play based on the family. I think that's happening more and more. But yeah, some coaches took the family with them, and that seemed to work for some. I mean, in some cases, really, out of the 17 coaches, we only had one coach that had divorced. Okay, and that coach actually had divorced because he actually brought his family to the new country, and the family didn't settle, and the family wanted to go back. He didn't, and that was it. Okay, so but the others managed to either move the whole family together, or there was 3 coaches, I think, that the way they managed this was because they worked on a seasonal sport. They were team coaches in professional leagues. They actually kept the family in the same place, and they went and worked in a different country with frequent trips whenever they could back home, and also obviously all the summer at home. And in fact, one of the wives, when we went to interview this coach, as she opened the door, she said to me, "Are you here to interview my winter husband or my summer husband? Because they are 2 different people." So yeah, everybody finds a different way, but it's a fundamental concern, something that you really have to think through before you make a decision like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Good question. So what's interesting for me about the presentations that we have from the 3 of you is that Sergio is dealing with people who have made it in their chosen career at the very highest level. We've got Sheila with a group of women who've been identified as already at high performance and moving to the next level and developing themselves more. And then we have Clare with the beginner, not beginner, that's it, but just the beginning of a program which is taking a generation of coaches and moving them to a higher level, but within a national federation. So I wanted to just see how what lessons we could take from each level. So I think we've discussed some of those, but Sergio, for Clare, who's just beginning with her, well, she's not just beginning, I think you've been done a year already, haven't you? So what do you think are the key things out of the top end that need to be considered when you're starting out on your coaching career?
Great question, really. So I've mentioned this already. You can't spend enough time thinking about who you are and thinking about who you want to be, because I think that's it's your starting point, because then everything you do out there when you're coaching, by coaching I mean the 24 hours of the day, not the 2 hours that we are in front of the athletes. Okay. Because that's another point that the coaches make, that coaching is not the time you spend in front of the athletes, it's everything else, really. That's the easy time, if you want, when you're in front of the athletes. So because all of that is influenced by who you are, I would really spend a lot of time there. Then you mentioned it, Rosie, I know this sounds really difficult to do when you're starting out, and I think a bit about myself, 25 years ago when I was starting to coach. It's hard to live beyond today. But I think something that these coaches were very good at, for a number of reasons, was the idea of looking into the future all the time, into the future of the performance, but also into the future of who you want to be in the future, and what kind of life do you want, and what kind of relationships. And this is going to sound really gloomy, but I think coaches starting out need to really understand what it is like to coach at the high performance level, and the pressures and the time constraints and the difficulties. I, for one, didn't do that, and then one day all of a sudden I went from being a club coach, which was hard enough, to then being a national team coach, which was a completely different ball game, and it took me completely by surprise, and I underperformed severely because I wasn't ready, and it took me a number of years to get up to the level where I felt I was comfortable doing that. So I would say really those 2 extremes: knowing who you are now and who you want to be, but also understanding the constraints of the job at the highest level, and then building back from there. Because what we think we need to do now, when we are starting out or coaching at a lower level, if you only see that, then you'll feel that you're doing fine, that you're good, and then when you take the next step, it's like, whoa. So really a bit more foresight really in that sense.
Okay, all right, thank you. And Sheila, with the WISLA, which is a group of women who've already been identified by their international federations as capable of coming onto the world stage, what do you think are the sort of key things in terms of, for them, in terms of what we're just talking about?
I think all of them are understanding how to have a vision for the future, which links to what Sergio was saying, and being in contact with high performance coaches who are already functioning at the international level and have had success. They're getting, I think, that window into what this means for them. And I think that is actually echoed in what Clare is doing with Antonio and her group of coaches who are on a high performance pathway, is that it's this sharing of the reality and knowing what that will look like and what it entails, good, bad, and the ugly. And one other thing that's come out with the WISLA HPC coaches from our group, but I've also gotten the impression that it's come out throughout the other sports and the other coaches involved, is they're also looking at other ways for themselves to grow and develop. So, and I think this goes back to this life balance, is that if you put all of your eggs in one basket and that basket turns out to have a hole in it, or, and I say that sort of symbolically, you know, situations with families changes, health changes, you might need to be helping an elderly parent or a child, or you might have a financial situation. There's a couple of the coaches who've had to readjust during the COVID period their situation with work, because it's provided enormous instability for them, as it has for many people. So I think there's been these coaches, one of the things they've done is started to look at scenarios and where they want to go, but also having the ability to adapt when when there's an impact that comes, and they have to, instead of going, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world, they're like, okay, I'm going to adjust in doing this. And I think that's for whether it's female coaches or whether it's any male coaches as well. I think the ability to adapt and readjust is probably a really important theme, and it allows those people to have a probably more longevity, because they can see that, okay, this year or the next few years, I'm not going to be able to do this, but I'm going to focus on these things to be able to get back into, if it's still the thing that I want and I love to do. So.
Thank you. And Clare, with your scheme that's going on, how do you think you can sell the attractiveness of high performance coaching to athletes that might be coming to the end of their careers, or to coaches that are in clubs already?
Yeah, I think like what Sergio is saying there, like, really resonates, in that trying to figure out, is that actually the lifestyle you want to be that high performance coach? And I'd like to say that, you know, this program, if I look at it down the line, like, and we've already kind of talked about it before, like, how do we measure the success of it? Is it that these 6 coaches are now going to be have a role in the high performance team and be the part of the Irish high performance coaching staff? That is one success. It would be great if one of them manages to go that way, that whole way up. But I think also the success of it is that we have 6 coaches that have become much stronger in their coaching philosophy. They have a much better understanding of high performance, and that they move into maybe lead coaching roles within their club or within their province, or even a university like professional role. I think that is also a success, because it's another role model that they will coach female athletes and say, yeah, I've had a really strong, good female coach, and that's an option for me. So I think, whilst one success is if we get someone on, we have more diversity in our high performance coaching team, but the other success is just pushing and supporting more women into higher positions in coaching, and hopefully that over a longer period of time as well, you have more women into coaching, and then more diversity at the top, at the highest level. I think it is a massive undertaking to become a high performance coach. It's a massive lifestyle choice. It's not for everybody by any means, but I think recognizing as well that us as a national federation, we want diversity at that level, and putting some small stepping stones that we're heading that direction, I think is key with this program. Hope that answers your question, Rosie.
Okay, yes, it does, I think. And
Rosie, could I just mention with that, I think there's also this, and I think we're seeing this throughout sport now, is that it's about the talent pool. And I think we're talking about a specific project that Claire's working on and that World Rowing is working on. But going back to Sergio's topic, is that there's actually, it's the same as with our athletes. The more athletes we have, the more that we're going to be able to create a strong system. I think we have to more and more take that approach with the coaches. I think sometimes it's been kind of an exclusive, high performance has been a very exclusive undertaking, which at the end of the day, because it's so demanding, it always will be. But I think you get better, you get a better diversity, a better talent pool when you have more of this diversity. I think that's more and more what we have to look at it is you'll actually have a lot of really good skill sets coming up that'll impact whether it's a larger team with a really, deep pool of 10 to 15 to 20 coaches, or whether you go to smaller pool, but you will have better people coming up. And then those people are going to identify the next generation. That means you have more athletes that can get involved and be coached by good people. And it's just, it's sort of a circular economy when we think about the coach and athlete, sort of the whole lifespan, and keeping it healthy and regenerating. And that ultimately leads to a healthier club and federation system because you just got more people coming in.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I'm sadly we've run out of time, so I'm going to bring this session to a close. But I think that the two presentations really resonated with each other, and so fantastic to have people at different ends of the scale who are involved in coaching and starting their journey in high performance or being at the top of their journey in high performance. Thank you very much indeed. And any questions that anybody else has got, if you put them into the question and answers, we'll try to answer them for you. So thank you, and we'll see you again, I'm sure.
Thanks, Rosie.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Frank and Ida, welcome. If you'd like to put on your videos, that would be great.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you both?
Good. And you?
Very good, thank you. So please also, I'd be very happy, we had a very good interaction in the last session with people asking each other questions. So if you two have questions for each other, I'm very happy that you ask them as well, rather than I ask all the questions. And I think those are also quite good insights to your world of physiology that we don't always pick up on. So, okay. So we will move on. We haven't had terribly long between sessions, but we'll move on. And first of all, I want to thank you both very much for your presentations, which I thoroughly enjoyed, as I'm sure people did. We've been having pretty good audiences for our webinars, or our not webinars, our videos that have been put up, so I'm sure a lot of people have been watching you. What I wanted to say as well is that if people have got questions, please put them in the question and answers, and we will try and answer them for you. Sorry, Ida and Frank will try and answer them for you, not me. But I wanted to start off I was really intrigued by the fact that both of you talked a little bit about combining altitude and heat. And I noticed that sort of in terms of red blood cells, that both those would actually allow you to increase your red blood cells. And how would you combine that coming into championships? Because I think you both talked a little bit about you tried to combine the two to see whether it works better. If it doesn't work better, or it's quite difficult to do, which I think it was Ida, you had a system where you had hot air blowers and people doing sprinting during their rowing training. So I just was intrigued to know, how would you manage that as a physiologist or as a coach? What advice would you give the coaches if they want to maximize their preparedness of their rowers for being in a top competition?
Shall I go first?
First, Ida? Yeah.
And so we've actually looked at this because quite a few of our endurance sports, typically they are at altitude right before important competitions and championships. So they didn't want to compromise on the altitude training to do the heat acclimation. So the main reason we wanted to look at it was whether you could combine the two. We weren't really interested in looking whether you could augment the red blood cell response. We just wanted to see that you didn't hamper or decrease the red blood cell response by doing the heat acclimation while at altitude. So we tested this out primarily with the cyclists and triathletes, because they're the group that typically are at altitude really close to competition. The rowers, our rowing team, are usually at altitude. If they use altitude before a competition, it's typically a little bit further in advance, so that you have time to come down from altitude and then do the heat acclimation at home. But for some of the athletes, they come straight from altitude and are thinking of going then straight to Tokyo, which means that we would have to do the heat acclimation there. And what we found was that obviously the two are both physiological stressors, and both have the potential to result in a blood response. But I was at least a little bit worried that the two would kind of cancel each other out, that the stress on the athlete would become too much. So we were really careful with the kind of the total training load, and that the intensity of the heat sessions they did at altitude were really low intensity, really well controlled. And we saw that it definitely didn't decrease the red blood cell response. The athletes seemed to respond kind of in a higher end of where the kind of response they would normally get. So we certainly didn't see that it impaired it. Maybe it actually boosts it a little bit, but I think you have to be really careful, because like I said, both are big stresses on the athlete, and it's easy that stress becomes too much. So I think you can definitely combine the two if your athletes want to be at altitude and then need to do the heat acclimation while they're there, but you need to be careful and make sure that the total load still with the training program in general and those heat sessions is kept within a kind of sensible range.
And Frank,
if I can complement, I'm agree with the answer from Ida. The main point is when you are combining both stressors, maybe we have to remember to the audience that the response are not always the best as the stress could be, because the higher is the stress when combining hypoxia and heat, and the response are not always correct to improve the performance. So in some cases we saw some adaptations, but there is no transfer on the performance. So at the moment, combining is not so is not recommendable at the moment with the stress we used. So for example, 3,000 meters and 35 to 40 degrees. Maybe we have to manage a different environmental stress with a lower altitude we can find in a natural environment like 2,000 meters with the heat stress, and maybe empirical evidence try to show that it will work more than with a higher load.
Okay, so here's where I show my ignorance of physiology, I'm afraid, probably by this question. So I was wondering whether the fact that you had increased your red cell count from and your hemoglobin mass from being at altitude, whether or not the heat stress that then followed was enough to maintain it, because I know there's a sort of window of best opportunity coming down from altitude to compete and have your maximum benefits from altitude. but your heat acclimation probably needs to be a longer period than that window is for such extreme temperatures that you might get in, say, Tokyo or Shanghai, which are two of the venues we're going to be at this year. Sorry, in 2021.
So I think that it's important that the research that's been done kind of on the hemoglobin mass response to heat training is quite new, and it hasn't been tested that thoroughly in kind of elite athletes. I think there's a lot less evidence on that compared to the altitude training, and the mechanisms driving the two are certainly very different. And you also, when you're at altitude, you get peripheral adaptations in the mitochondria and the buffering capacity in the blood. You get additional adaptations that you wouldn't get with heat training. So you would, I don't think anyone's looked at kind of maintaining altitude responses using heat training, but I think typically we don't use a longer period than 2 weeks for our heat acclimation, even if the conditions are as severe as in Tokyo. I think most athletes acclimate really well within 14 days. So you don't necessarily need a really long period just because the conditions are tough. So we see there's big individual differences, but typically on average, an athlete will acclimate well within 14 days to heat. Whereas altitude, obviously, it depends a little bit. If you're looking at increasing sea level performance, then you would probably need to be at altitude for a minimum of 3 weeks to see that kind of red blood cell response that you're talking about.
Okay, thank you. Frank?
One point is concerning the hemoglobin mass improvement. There is some new studies showing it's working with heat acclimation, but some others currently under publication also show maybe it's not working. It's not the primary point. If you remember in one of my slides, I pinpoint one recent study showing that the main mechanisms for heat acclimation is plasma, blood plasma and blood volume expansion rather than hemoglobin mass. So that's the first point. And after that, I think that from a periodization point of view, it's important because most of coaches want to keep the altitude training, but they have to bear in mind that for Tokyo in particular, you have to heat acclimatize to perform. So you have, unfortunately, in the scientific literature, we don't have the answers now, but you have to find the best combination to make your altitude preparation to boost the oxygen carrying capacity and performance, and to also adapt with the heat acclimation to perform as best during this environment.
Okay, so would you agree with the heat acclimation of about 2 weeks, or do you think it takes longer?
No, from my point of view, 2 weeks, it's the best way to heat acclimatize. Of course, you can acclimatize with shorter periods, longer periods also, because there is some individual variation. So maybe you have to adapt, but from a real setting perspective, the 2 weeks will be the best way. Eventually, when you are residing already in Tokyo, should be the best way to acclimatize. But also the second point is you have to make your tapering on the same time. So it's not always easy to manage the heat and to taper on the same period.
Okay. So the life of a physiologist is a balancing one, is it? Balancing always the options. Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask you also, both of you talked about core body temperature, particularly you, Frank, spoke about it, and whether or not the duration of the rowing is only sort of 6-7 minutes or five minutes something. Is that a sort of key issue when we're talking about endurance sports that are going on for 2 hours or even longer? Is it a key component of rowing that we need to consider?
From a performance perspective, you're right. Maybe it's not enough long to increase the core temperature. But after, you have to see the overall picture. From rowing, they have to spend sometimes, maybe they will not have access for to air conditioning rooms. So maybe they have to spend a long of time outside or whatever. They have to spend some time outside for training. So acclimatization would be a bonus point to prepare the athlete.
Okay.
In my view.
Ida?
Yeah, I totally agree. And your point about comparing to competitions like the triathlon or marathon running or race walking, where the duration is really long, it is going to have less of an impact on rowing because the competition duration is so short. We've done some measurements of core body temperature, particularly with the lightweight rowers, because they're already starting their warm-up typically with a slightly elevated core body temperature because of the weigh-in procedures. And we see there that actually during the course of the warm-up, the core body temperature does increase a surprising amount. So you're actually already starting the race, in some cases, perhaps with a core temperature that's higher than what would be optimal for performance if the athletes are following the same warm-up routines, particularly as they would in cooler conditions. And these athletes are also going to be training out there. I think that's the main kind of rationale for us doing so much of the heat acclimation back in Norway before they go, is that we want them to get those good training sessions and the quality and the kind of the self-confidence as well, that they feel good in those training sessions that are going to have quite a long duration, a much longer duration than the actual race. And they're going to get the most out of that, and that they're not going to get to race day and be completely worn out just by the training that they've done in Tokyo beforehand. So that's kind of, but you're absolutely right that the impact of the climate in Tokyo is going to have the biggest impact on the competitions with the longest duration. So rowing kind of falls in there somewhere with kind of middle distance running, that I think it's still really important that the athletes are heat acclimatized, but it's not as critical and it's not going to have as big an impact as it will for the triathletes or the marathon runners.
Okay. And Franck, you talked about stressors as being a way of not manipulating, but improving your physiology. And so, and you said it's important that you actually do, you don't use all of the, actually, not, maybe it wasn't you, but one of the physiologists talked, we've had four, somebody spoke about the fact that you actually had to get those responses from the body, even if you got an underperformance initially, then you'd get an overperformance later. But presumably at the competition would be a time that you would use interventions to try to bring the body temperature down or to do other things. Is that really where you see those things being used, like ice baths or whatever else it happens to be?
Yes, I didn't mention it in my talk, but Ida mentioned some points on this. You can use some cooling interventions, so pre, during, or mix cooling. I didn't mention it, but of course you can add it in your preparation tools to best prepare the competition or even the training, and to help to recover some athletes, but also to reduce, it will not be the case maybe with the rowers, but to reduce the core temperature before performing. So many of these interventions, so could be cold water immersion or ice slurring ingestion, or wearing only some cooling vest, could be of course of importance and be part of the intervention the physiologists or the staff should provide to the athletes.
Okay, Ida? Sorry, it was you that I got very confused with all the physiology presentations, which have all been absolutely excellent.
That's fine. We're all quite alike. So, but no, I agree, and it's something that I would say for race day. I wouldn't use the cooling interventions. You can always, it's nice to test them out at home if you have an environmental chamber and you want to test both the efficacy and how the athlete kind of responds to it. I think some of the cooling methods are too aggressive to be used when rowing. For example, the cold water immersion that I just showed some data on is really effective, but it's probably not relevant for rowing. But I wouldn't use them during the acclimation process, because then you're actually blunting the stimulus for the athlete to adapt. Those sessions need to be uncomfortable. I think the athletes have to kind of understand that too, that the first time some of these athletes do these heat sessions, they find them really, really tough, particularly the first ones. And I think it's important to tell them that that's completely normal, and that in order to actually stimulate the body to change and to adapt, those heat sessions need to be uncomfortable, particularly the first ones. And if you're introducing loads of cooling strategies, then you're actually blunting that stimulus for the athlete to adapt. But on race day, we quite a lot of our athletes use cooling vests and ice slurry ingestion. Those are probably the two kind of cooling strategies that we use. And also, I think one of the really important things is to look at your athletes' warm-up routines. And I think most athletes have kind of a religious kind of routine that they always do. And it doesn't matter what the temperature is or anything else, it's always the same. They have to do it at this intensity and this duration. And typically what we see when it's really warm is that the shorter and the lower intensity the warm-up can be, while your athlete still obviously needs to be prepared and ready to perform on the start line, but you want to probably cut down the duration and probably cut down the intensity a little bit compared to what they would need in cooler conditions, because the body and the muscles heat up a lot quicker when it's warm.
Have either of you done anything much on hydration strategies? Because it would seem that they could be, especially during the early phases of acclimatization, your body sort of sweats more. So have you done some work on that as well?
We always work, so our nutritionist that works with rowing she and I work really closely on all the heat stuff, so she's almost always there when we're doing the kind of anything related to heat with the athletes. So we measure the sweat rates and we look at the hydration plans for the athletes, and I won't go into too much detail since I'm not a nutritionist, but we certainly see that there are very big individual differences in sweat rates, and also we see that kind of most athletes aren't kind of naturally, they won't, without you giving them a plan, they won't drink enough, or particularly in terms of kind of both electrolytes and fluids. We often see the first time they do kind of a heat acclimation sessions, and they do several in a row, that they progressively dehydrate. So we have a really big focus on this, but that's mainly our team nutritionist who follows all that up with each individual athletes and makes a plan for each individual.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And over that period, presumably also things stabilize a bit as they become better acclimated.
Typically, you actually see that athletes sweat more as they become acclimatized. They might lose less salt in the sweat, so the sweat will be less concentrated. But because sweating is one of the body's most effective ways of cooling itself down, that's actually quite an important kind of sign of acclimation, is that the athlete is becoming more efficient, producing more sweat to cool them down. So sometimes we always get the athletes to weigh themselves before and after every session they do during a heat acclimation, to make sure that they're not getting off the bike 2 kilos lighter than they were when they went in, because that would suggest that they've lost 2 liters of fluid that they haven't managed to replace during the session. So I think they probably get better at realizing how much they should be drinking during the course of the heat acclimation, but actually they typically lose a little bit more fluid towards the end than they do at the start.
Okay, right, thanks. And Frank, would you have similar?
Nothing more to add. Maybe just one practical point is that all this intervention should be tested long time before the competition to see the individual response, because one may know that ingesting, for example, ice slurry could have some side effects in some athletes. So you have to test which situation will be the best for each athlete and to individualize the response for each one.
Yeah, okay. And it's, as Ida said as well, that they all sweat at a different rate and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. There was one thing, Ida, I wanted to ask you, which you talked about going to altitude and the importance of not taking athletes that were in any way ill or injured, because altitude compromised recovery from both illness and injury. How do you manage that when you come to the final altitude camp, when presumably they're on the water rowing in their crews they're going to race in? So how does that actually get managed? You know, do you take people that have got up to altitude that have got something, or do you leave the crew behind? What do you do?
Obviously, that's up to it's the athletes and the coaches that have to make the final decision. But I would never advise an athlete to go to altitude if they are not healthy and preferably also injury free. It depends a little bit on the injury. But we see that even kind of having an infectious tooth can blunt the hemoglobin mass response. And we typically see that the athletes who do go up there and maybe get sick while they're at altitude, they typically take longer to recover when they're there compared to if they were at home at sea level. So I would also suggest that if you have an athlete at altitude that gets sick, I would suggest sending them home, even though it's obviously tough for the athlete who's already traveled up there and kind of usually they want to stay. I think the good thing about, I actually did my PhD looking at influences on immune function of different kind of training methods that athletes use. And we looked at how hypoxia and altitude influence the immune system. And what we do see is that there is a slightly bigger stress response to a training session carried out at altitude that results in the immune system being a little bit depressed after training at altitude compared to sea level. But typically we don't actually see that our athletes get sick very often when they're at altitude because they're so isolated from the rest of the world and any kind of people who could be carrying a cold or any kind of viral infection. So once they get to altitude, we actually have very few athletes getting sick while they're there. But I would certainly not, even if it's the last preparation camp before the games, I would certainly not suggest that an athlete that's sick go to altitude while they have an infection, because they're much better off staying home and training. And obviously it becomes more complicated when you have 4 or 8 rowers all sitting in the same boat and maybe 3 of them want to go to the altitude and the last one doesn't. But then it's up to the coach to make the decision that's best for the team in general. That kind of takes into consideration all those 4 athletes and how they kind of prepare the best way. And we have that even without illness. We have kind of that problem with athletes where we have maybe 2 athletes who typically feel that they respond really well to altitude and 2 that don't, and then you have kind of that conflict about whether or not to take them to altitude right before an important race. And like I said, that decision is up to the coach and the athletes in terms of working out what's best for the boat in general.
Thank you. And Frank, in your presentation, you talked about how rowers typically didn't have quite such a big response to altitude training, maybe because they already have very high hemoglobin mass, but also variation in terms of people responding to altitude. I mean, how do you, presumably that varies with the amount of times that they've been to altitude as well, or not?
I think it's Ida that's saying that the athletes with initial high hemoglobin mass will not respond for altitude. In my slide, inversely, I demonstrate that based on some pool data we analyze and also from some other researchers, we demonstrate that there is no correlation between the initial hemoglobin mass, moderate correlation, low to moderate correlation between the initial hemoglobin mass and the response to altitude. So saying that there is still some place for improvement even in athletes with high hemoglobin mass.
Okay, and do you typically see people who go on a regular basis to altitude? Do they respond better the more they go, or what happens? I mean, if you go the first time and it's not great, would you say to an athlete you should persevere, or what would you do?
You can persevere because there is, of course, some inter-individual response, but some athletes who already have experience with altitude will respond quicker and probably better also. So we have some experience with some athletes, not rowers, but showing that they repeat the altitude camping to prepare themselves for some other training period, but also to prepare some competition. And over time, the response are better. They can change also the way they will enter in the hypoxia with a higher exposition to higher altitude level and to adapt quicker. So yes, there is some possibility to improve the response to hypoxic stress and to perform better and better. So that's the first point. And the non-responder, I don't like the word with good and bad responder, but I like the study from Romero and Lundby. They show not using altitude, but they show that when you are using normal endurance training, you have some good and bad responder. And the bad responder, once you modify the training, they become good responder. So that will be the same with altitude exposition. You have to find the good level or the good hypoxic, the optimal hypoxic dose for each athlete. So of course, in natural environment, it's not easy to do that because you cannot change the way they will be exposed. But when you are using normobaric hypoxia, we can manage the level of altitude and we can manage the response individually.
Okay, so you use quite a few, you use artificial ways of achieving hypoxia through a chamber or whatever.
So we have, in France, we are lucky we could use both. So we have some training camp like Prémanon and Font-Romeu, training place in natural environment, but we can also use some normobaric hypoxia to boost. And it's also the new paradigm with using the living low training high, where I make some few presentation using the repeated sprint in hypoxia or resistance training in hypoxia is open some new doors for training optimization also. And it includes also the rowers because they can boost at different periods of their preparation, not especially to prepare a competition, but they can boost some of their physical or fitness components.
Okay, and how long do they need to be doing that for then in a hypoxic chamber?
So it's more easier. For example, if you are doing the repeated sprint in hypoxia, you need no more than 1 hour training, 2 to 3 times per week for 2 weeks, and you will get some good response. So we are quite comfortable to say that for more than 25 studies now, we have most of them showing some benefits when using this kind of training. And few days ago also, there is another talk from some colleagues showing the good response using this kind of exercise or resistance training in hypoxia also, or blood flow restriction. And that's some good tools also to keep in mind to boost your performance level.
Okay, thank you. And Ida, I was very interested to see that you aren't allowed to use artificial methods via hypoxia. Why is that?
It's a rule in Norway that's it's been in place for quite a few years now. I think we're the only country in the world now that isn't where our athletes aren't permitted to use.
Italia, I think, is in the same case.
Sorry?
Italia also, I think they cannot.
I think they've changed the rules now.
I
thought they'd allowed it now. Anyway, it used to be Italy and Norway, and I'm not sure if Italy still have those rules, but our athletes, it's basically the kind of Norwegian anti-doping laws say that because it's not natural that our athletes aren't allowed to use it. So all of our athletes use only natural altitude training, and we're not allowed to use an altitude tent or a hypoxic chamber. So
interesting. Okay, thank you. I wanted to just talk a little bit, or see to finish really. What would you say in terms of a young coach with a group of young athletes are going to be the most important thing for them to develop in terms of for rowing? So we're talking rowing, and we're talking the distance of 2,000 meters. What are the things that they're going to have to consider most in terms of developing those young athletes physiologically?
I think certainly that obviously our talks have been on kind of heat and altitude, and heat's going to be really important for Tokyo, but in the bigger picture, I think that both heat and altitude and all those they're the tip of the iceberg, and the things that all the everyday training and the continuity of the training, I think, is what is 90% of the the success criteria for an athlete. And you should only really be considering the altitude training and all the extra things that can give you maybe an extra 0.5% or a 1% once you have all that in place. So I think with young athletes, it's getting that periodizing the training right so that you get the right combination of aerobic and anaerobic stimuli, I think, particularly for rowing and strength. And that, like I said, that continuity of training, finding something that allows them to train well over a longer period of time without getting injured or sick or injured or anything else that breaks up that training. So like I said, I think the things that we've talked about now they're the last final percentages that you should be looking for kind of with once you've done everything else with your athletes, and it's not the bread and butter of the kind of training that's the most important bit.
Okay, so for young coaches or coaches that are perhaps developing young athletes, more important is do the basics well, and develop your athletes, and then these are the nice to haves for those that can manage it. Okay, yeah. Thank you. Franck, you did mention, I will ask you the same question as I just asked Ida, but the other thing you mentioned very much in passing was restricting blood flow. Yes. Was that right? Yeah. Would you just talk a little bit about that and what that is and how it works?
So you are making a partial occlusion of the limbs, so the lower or upper limb, and for that you are using some cuff, so preferably with a medical control where you can measure the arterial blood flow. And we use, like for resistance training, we are using a percentage of the occlusion, the total occlusion, and we will allow still arterial flow, but we will block the venous return. And for that, we are creating a local hypoxia, and where there is some disturbance, this is the way we permit some adaptation.
Oh, okay, all right. So that it sounded that it's something you're just beginning, or is just beginning.
Oh no, it's start almost 20 years ago from the Japanese. So it was Sato. They named that the Katsu training. And from my side, I use since few times only, but discuss with some colleagues which have a bigger experience on this kind of training, like Brendan Scott in Australia. Of course, there is some interest. So, for example, I present the study from one of my students working with blood flow restriction and combining it with it, and we get some surprising results and interesting results. So that's the way. That's why we are still pursuing our work in this direction, because there is some interesting way to improve performance. But of course, should be like all training should be well controlled, well managed to avoid any side issue.
Okay, and your advice to young coaches with a group or to coaches with young athletes, what would it be in terms of developing their physiology?
So I will get the same answer than he does. So there is many ways to train your young athletes using some basics training before to go to like new training or new paradigm using the blood flow restriction or other type of fundamental stress, or no. Before, I think the basis should be made with what is well managed before to go further with adding some other parameters.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, both of you. I really enjoyed your presentations, and I thought there was some great resonance between the two, but also some different, you came at it from slightly different directions. So, thank you for taking part in this year's World Rowing Virtual Coaches Conference.
Thank you very much for having us.
To World Rowing to invite us to share with you.
Thank you. Okay. Take care. Bye.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So, hello, Lars. Hello, Lars.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And you?
Very good. Thank you very much. So I have questions for you. I thought your talk was fascinating, and I've got lots of, I'd like to know how to do it better. So, but we won't start yet because we may have a few extra people joining us, and we have another 3 or 4 minutes before we're scheduled to go, and that just gives people the opportunity to come in or out of a session.
Yeah.
Okay. And where are you based? You're in Oslo, I think you said.
Yeah, I work in Oslo 50%, and I work 50% in Bergen on the west coast.
Yeah.
And so I have the same job in two places. So
Are they both high performance centers or Olympic coach places?
In Oslo, we have this Olympic training center for the best. It's the central, and in Bergen we have a regional center where we follow up the elite athletes in that region. So they do not have to go to Oslo, all of the athletes.
And I guess the question I should have asked either is, do you have any, because I think about Norway as having, skiing and outdoor activities and sports. Is that purely based on the fact that you have your north, or do you also have pretty big mountains and so on?
Actually, if you go to the Alps, you have much higher altitude on the mountains than in Norway, but it is north, and half of Norway is north of the polar circle.
Yeah.
So we have snowy winters and cold conditions. So I believe that's the main reason. But we also have some tradition in rowing and in paddling as well, which are summer sports. So I think it's, for them, training it's skiing in winter as a variation maybe is one of the success criteria for performing well in summer sports.
So what percentage of your population would do cross-country skiing in the winter?
Like training, quite a few, but it's not like every Norwegian is going skiing. But I believe that elite skiing, as top level skiing, there are several hundreds, and if all of them were to show up in the World Championship, they would be performing quite well. So we're quite many skiers compared to the rest of the world, of course.
Yeah, but you also have, so I guess would most Norwegians learn how to cross-country ski, like in the same way that I might, in my school, might have learned how to play tennis or something? Would most of them learn to cross-country ski?
Yeah, we like to believe that. And my kids, and my family, and my family tradition is going skiing in the weekends in the winter. And more like recreation than training.
Yeah.
But it's nice to be outdoor in the mountains or in the woods.
It's also nice to do something as a family, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and I guess it's something that you can do as a family, so that's quite nice as well.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Okay. We'll give it one more minute and then we'll start. So we'll start on time. And yeah, thank you very much as well for the video and the demonstrations. That was excellent.
Thank you.
So we'll start now then. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the final session of this live question time on the 5th of December. And I've said good morning. I know for some of you it's probably evening or in the middle of the night even. I'm welcome to Lars-Arne Andersen, and he gave an excellent talk about skill development and also some videos as well. And I wanted to start. I think I have been lucky enough to see a demonstration before of not of your skill, but of it was to do with it was just before the Winter Olympics some years ago, and you had an outstanding skier who went on to win several gold medals. But what had been identified was that she had a very slight difference between her strength and power on one leg to the other. And so there was a program developed which was quite a lot around jumping from one bar to another bar and maintaining her balance and skill. And then we saw Olaf Tufte doing the same thing. So I was just, wanted to know sort of where had this skill development come from? You know, is it something you've been using a long time in Norway?
Yeah, I think back in the 80s, alpine skiers started doing this kind of training. They called it cross training. It was they had this vision about becoming as strong as a gymnast and as gracious as a ballet dancer while doing their sport. So they implemented some new exercises, some new methods in their training, which included body control, coordination, stability, mobility, different skills that was quite different from what they used to do. And in the late 80s, they started to deliver quite decent results in alpine skiing. And from this, after I think back in the Winter Olympics in 1988 in Calgary, Norway had quite poor results. To be Norway, it was a disaster. And so they started this Olympic training program, you can call it, or what today is Olympiatoppen, which is the Olympic training center in Norway. And this cross training became part of some of the training. It was an addition to the regular training. And they found out that training with variation gave them an opportunity when they wanted to develop their main sport. So doing other things than just rowing, other things than just cross-country skiing, improve the ability to gain new skills and improve techniques. So we've had this kind of thinking, kind of training for several decades now, but it has changed during these 30 years from being just exercises that are different from the main sport to exercises that are relevant more to the main sport. So when Olaf Tufte is doing this balance, coordination exercises, we want him to have to see this, that they are relevant for his rowing. When he uses his legs in rowing, he needs this timing, this to be precise in the way he produces the force. From where does the force come from? Does it come from the thighs, the hip, the glutes? He must try to be aware of some qualities while doing this motor skills training, which was called cross training many years ago. So for us, it's important not just the exercise, but that the exercise is in the athlete's whole, in his or her context.
Yeah.
If that made any sense.
Yeah. So I guess, as I said, I was lucky enough to see him sort of jumping from side to side, whereas what you showed was him standing on a beam, which is sort of quite like being on your footboard in the boat, and then pulling up on the two elastics as he stood up. So presumably that is where it's developed to be more in tune with what he's doing in the boat.
Yeah, we hope so, and of course we talk to the athlete. It's not like I just give Olaf an exercise and say to him that if you do this one, job is done, and we need to talk it over, to find out, to reflect over, is it relevant? If I use time on this one, is that the well-spent use of time? Can I do other things that are more useful? And Olaf is experienced, of course. He's been in the game for many years, so he is critical. He does not waste his time. So there's always a good discussion where we talk and weigh pro and contra before we go for it when it comes to using an exercise. Since I am not a rower, I come from gymnastics, which is completely different. I have a different perspective, I think, to looking at movement solutions or technique, if you want. So I think to work with a sport that is so different from my own sport gives me an opportunity to ask some of the silly questions, to ask, why on earth are you doing this? And sometimes the answer is, of course, it's a good answer, because it's relevant for this and it gives me more a higher performance level. Or they can answer, because we have always done it like this. It's a tradition. And that's when I start asking more questions. Is that a good answer to that question? Is that well spent time doing what you have always done before? So I try always to vary, try to make the exercises a little bit more from the side, maybe, not just on the main part.
Yeah, so not just replicating exactly what's going on in the boat.
No, because what you do in the boat is the most relevant, of course. And if you try to do something that's almost the same on land or ashore, maybe it's better just to row than trying to do something looking like rowing, but it isn't. So when in my presentation, I was talking about giving the athletes not only the physical skill, but a way of thinking. And when it comes to way of thinking, it's being critical about how can this be relevant? And during different exercises, of course, giving them different problems to solve gives them an opportunity to reflect. What's in this? Is it good for me? Isn't it? And so on. So that process, I think, can be valuable for the rowers when they go to the boat and to the water and 100% specific in their work. They can have some sensibility, to be sensitive about the way they solve the problem rowing technique. So hopefully it's a process that they can use to improve rowing technique.
Okay, so what you're trying to do is get them to think a bit more laterally so that they can apply that when some problem arises they weren't expecting.
Yes, and that's also one of the things I was focusing on in my presentation, to be able to adapt. We all know that to duplicate the movement exactly the same, that's an illusion. It's always something that is different. And to have this capability to, in changing conditions, to find the best solution like this. It should not take reflecting a long time. It should be like an instinct, finding the correct solution in no time. And I think you need to spend some time training on that, because if not, it's just pure coincidence if you find the right solution.
Yeah. Okay, I want to take you back into the presentation a bit more, because and we'll come back to some of the things you've just been talking about in a minute. So you have made the distinction between mobility and flexibility several times. You made it in your presentation, and you said it again this morning. Can you just talk a little bit more about how they're different and what you would do for each of those?
For me, and I'm not a scientist here, so this is just the way I use the terms. Mobility is more, it's a bigger thing than just flexibility. I think mobility is the ability to do the movements more actively, while flexibility can be more about changing or improving a range of motion. So mobility can be more a full body perspective, but flexibility maybe is more joint or fewer joints perspective. When I want to improve flexibility with an athlete, I maybe give them a structured program, stretching for that long, for this long, and with that many repetitions. So it's very, very structured. We can measure before they start training and after to see if they improve the range of motion. Mobility is for me more complex. It's about movement quality as well, timing, coordination. So mobility, and one thing I can just say about our, in our department, we have talked a lot about how we use our language, and some words mean several things in different contexts. So it's quite messy, but we're working on trying to find a better terminology when it comes to these words. So when I use these words, sometimes they can be what you say. You can have one understanding, and another can have another one. So it's important that I try to explain what I mean, which I didn't in my presentation.
Yeah. So really, what you're saying is that mobility would be around performing some sort of action. I mean, yeah. So yes, it's got a move. It's a whole movement rather than just being able to move a joint through this range of motion.
Yeah.
Which is more the
flexibility. Yeah. That's right.
Okay. All right. Thank you. You also, in your presentation, you showed some athletes who were lying on their front, and they were taking their leg sort of behind them. And you talked about you do a lot with I don't know if it was with everybody, but certainly with the rowers, you were talking about it being sort of around lower back, hip, and pelvis. Mm-hmm. But you also talked about trying to improve flexibility whilst also using some, and I think it was that you were actively engaging the muscles on the other side of the joint, something like that. Could you explain a little bit more about what that meant and how you're achieving that?
Yeah, but that's a good example, because it's a mix between mobility work and flexibility work. These are active movements, active stretching, if you like. And to produce a movement over one joint or several joints, you need to have some muscle activation. That's on one side of the body, one side of the joint, and so on. The other side of the body, the other side of the joint, should not restrict that muscle activity. It should actually relax more. So if I use my biceps here, I have 10 kilos. I know that this is working, but I also know that the triceps is more relaxed. It's not a very good solution if that's also activated while I'm flexing my elbow. So we try to create large range of motions, yes, but we also like to try to create good movement solutions. It's a good solution if you activate on one side, but the other side is inhibited or relaxed more. And for me, it's giving the athletes the contrast between active and more passive muscle work. And they also, when they do these exercises, they can also try to be aware of the quality. It's more restricted on my right side than on my left side. Why is that? It's not only to find a solution right there. It's not always easy, but it's easy. It's important that they discriminate the differences from side to side. Is it helpful for your rowing that it's very different? The way you produce a movement on your left side compared to the right side. Maybe it has nothing to do with the rowing, but it starts a process thinking, can I do something here that can be helpful? Yeah.
Okay, and you showed some one of your rowers standing in a circle with one foot, so balancing on one leg, and then taking some motion, reaching out forward, reaching out to the side, crossing over, etc. So if I've gone through that assessment,
Yep.
and I'm restricted in certain ways, maybe, how would you develop the program that would enable that to be balanced, and what would you consider to be balanced? So if I'm sort of within 2 centimeters, is that okay, or do I need to be absolutely at the same level? So what are you looking for in terms of that?
Yeah, actually, I'm not looking very much at the quantity. You must not say that to other people, but that's not the most important for me when I do these assessments.
I won't tell anybody else. It's all right.
What I try to see and observe and have the athlete reflect over is the quality of the movement, because you can reach 70 centimeters with your right hand and also 70 centimeters with your left, but it could be really no effort on your right, but a hard effort on your left. So it's the same quantity, but the way you get there can be very different. So for me, that's one thing. Or something restricting the movement or the range of motion. And secondly, from where does the movement come? What does initiate the movement? Because if you stand on both feet and you want to pick up something from the floor, you can start the movement by flexing your hip first, or you can start by flexing your knees first. You still pick up what you lost on the floor. That's 2 different movement strategies. And movement strategies, that's a word that it says something about what do you prefer as a solution when it comes to movement. That's a movement strategy. In rowing, I think the movement strategy should be symmetric. At least if you row on a single sculler. Of course, there are some asymmetric techniques in rowing as well, but mainly it should be quite symmetrical. And if you have on one side a hip strategy, where you start with the hip, and on the other side have a knee strategy, where you start with your knee, then there's some, there can be something that, is it supposed to be like this? Can it be improved? Does it mean anything? And of course, I do not have that solution. I will have to talk with the coach and the athlete to see, are there things in your or his or her rowing that matches these findings? And very often there is something in the rowing that can be related to asymmetric movement strategy. And so to answer your question, 2 centimeters doesn't matter that much. It's the way you produce the movement that matters the most.
Okay. All right. And then you'd work with the athlete and the coach to look at whether or not some sort of intervention might be required, and then you develop that with the athlete and the coach.
Yeah, that's right. Based on my experience, based on their experience. So it's not like I'm just turning the page from one year to another. I try always to make it custom, is that the word, to the what this athlete needs.
Okay, thank you. And then I was also very interested to see that a lot of what you were doing and the challenges you were presenting people involved balance, quite a lot of balance and stability. Do you work on developing that separately, or is it as a sort of a part of a complex movement? And I'll tell you why I'm asking that in a minute.
Yeah, I'm doing, it's like a ladder of progression. We can start quite general with what is balance. in different positions. It can be standing, knees in kneeling position, sitting, even lying on the front or on the back. There are different general exercises you can do for balance. So I wanted the athletes to have an understanding of what is balance. And then we try to put this quality into exercises. If you do a one-leg squat on the floor, that's one thing. If you do it on an unstable surface, you can't lift that heavy, probably, because it's more demanding when it comes to precision. If you miss with 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters, that means that's a big difference if you stand on a surface that's unstable compared to standing on the floor. So and basically when you sit in, I have tried once to sit in a single sculler, and it was very challenging when it comes to balance. Of course, I did not flip, but I did not move anyway either. So I was just sitting there. But of course, we try to make it the balance work more and more relevant for rowing technique. So we end up sitting, doing something with where you need to produce some force. It could be only a small part of the movement, or even larger sectors of the movement. But where you need to have this good stability, the good base of support to be able to produce the force.
Okay, and I see. I used to coach some youngsters, and many of them, particularly while they're growing, their balance is not so good. I mean, neither is knowing where their arm is either, but especially when they've got long arms, but their balance isn't so good. So is that a key time to do some of these interventions, or do you think you should wait till the athlete's a little better developed?
I think we had this open approach, this triangle with the athlete and the environment and the task. And I think there are ways that coaches that are coaching youngsters can challenge the athletes while doing changes in for instance, the environment and also the tasks on an earlier stage. That means variation. Of course, the boats, I guess, they're almost always the same. You can't change the length of the oars and the stability of the boat from session to session. But you can, I think you can. I've seen a lot of drills, just like rowing with straight arms, rowing with only the legs, putting the ears up above the water. I think there are many things that you can do from your quite young age when it comes to challenging these qualities in the boat. On shore, on land, I think there's a lot of things that you can do in, I don't know what you call those sessions, but it's not isolated strength work, but it can be some endurance work with working in circle. Yeah. I think you could put in some exercises that are not only hard, but they can be difficult as well when it comes to the quality, like balancing on a beam, jumping on a beam from quite young age. I believe that's possible. And I think it's very useful for them to get this knowledge about how you solve these problems quite early.
Yeah.
But in rowing, they do not start like in gymnastics when they're 5 or 6. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they are 10, 11, 12, 13 years when they start. So I think communication should be quite much easier in that age than when they are 6. So I think it's possible to introduce them quite early to stability work.
Okay, so that becomes something that's quite important, I guess. We don't want to have injuries either.
Of course, injury prevention is a big part of it.
Well. Okay. I said I'd come back to sort of some of the exercises and things like that you were doing, and part of the reason for that is I was thinking particularly about a video that our coastal that Gwyn Batten, who's the chair of the Rowing for All Commission, which has coastal rowing, and she showed a video of some very poor water. I mean, it was really churning up in all directions. It was on the sea, and how some people really struggled, and other people were able to row through it because they sort of let the boat go, but managed to keep the body still, and so therefore row. And I think that's going to be, I can see that in a sort of fairly tippy sculling boat with a crosswind or something on a rowing course, you have a problem to solve, which is how to keep your balance and get both blades in together or whatever. And then you have the additional complexities of the sea. So can you just talk a little bit about how you would approach a course where you might know you're going to have a side wind, or suddenly if you get challenged with all the coastal rowers wanting to know how to manage really rough and turbulent water, how would you go about doing that?
First of all, I hope they will spend some time training under those conditions. They do not skip training if it's a poor. The conditions are poor. When I work with the Norwegian rowers, I use unstable surface, and I use asymmetric setups. For instance, there was in the first picture, there was in the presentation, second one maybe, there was a short video of Olaf pushing an elastic band.
Yeah.
Very often I try to make it harder on one side to see if they still can be able to have this symmetric appearance, and I can also stand behind and make it more difficult pulling and pushing, so they do not know what I am doing, so they have to adapt instantly. So that's only a fragment of the context, but to be able to adapt fast, as I was talking about earlier, I think that's a key quality. Like you explained that the upper body was not moving, but the boat could move a lot, and to be able to let the upper body do its thing, that's producing a good catch and everything, without the lower body interfering. So if the lower body goes like this and the upper body does like this, then you have a balanced strategy going all the way up. So for me, it's important for the athletes to develop a balanced strategy that is as low as possible, close to the pelvic area, so the upper body is able to take care of its business, and the lower body is taking care of balance. So finding exercises that gives them that challenge. The lower body is going like this, it's wobbly. But I want the upper body to do whatever it wants. You can juggle, and you can't see from here and up, that it's really challenging below.
Yeah. Okay. Somebody's just put a question into the question and answer. So it's about when you have to react in correcting a disturbance, then that is a cognitive action, a focus change. That's what I always see. This is also, it also is different for every rower in a boat. So it definitely doesn't contribute to simultaneous rowing. The better way is to introduce a handling protocol that is easy to do, that always takes in mind the actual balance in the turning points. So I think what this is saying is that if we all have different, and he says, and all will correct it automatically. So what he's saying is that if we've got a number of people in a boat, what we can't have is 4 different strategies for how they're going to manage the balance in the boat. So have you done anything in terms of crew work together, in terms of strategies to allow the body to sort of be at one level? How do they do it together?
I have not done exercises where they are sitting at the same, let's see, the same beam at the same time, because I think that could be missing the what I'm really looking for, because it's not in the boat. It's too different. But I know from the Norwegian rowers that they have done some measurements in the boat, 3-dimensional, how the boat moves in all directions. And when they row really well, the boat is consistent in the way it moves. And maybe all of the rowers want to be a little bit more adjusted to the right, maybe. So they all want the same. It can be that the boat that looks perfectly balanced, you have one rower this way and one rower this way, and that's a lot of compensation to keeping the boat in the middle. So I think it's not useful if they have very poor strategies to get in center again. But I think it's possible to have different strategies if they're really sensitive. That if I'm a rower and I notice I have to do a small adjustment and I do it very fast, I think that will be less disturbing than having a strategy that takes time, because then that will affect the others more. So what we aim for is having a strategy that is very effective, that you sense instabilities that early, so early that you can't even see that you had imbalance. Yeah. It's like driving a car on a icy surface. If it's a little bit slippery, then maybe the back is going like this. And if you do this with the steering wheel, then you drive off the road into the pit. So small adjustments as early as possible. That's what we aim for. And I think there's room for different strategies because the rowers are different. Some are tall, some are small. They are so different.
Okay, so what you're really saying is the skill level needs to be very high and the solution focus needs to be very immediate, so that they really understand how they are managing their body, I guess, and managing their ability and stability.
Yeah, but there's one thing, and in a training situation you can have this reflection and focusing, but in a competition there's no room for that. It has to be instinctively done without thinking, because that slows you down. So what we're aiming for is, it's of course this adaptation happening by instinct.
Okay,
it's easy to say.
Yes, very much more difficult to manage. And if you've been in a boat, my one and not one and only, but an early race I did on the sea, we had a crosswind and cross waves, and I don't think we never managed to do 1 or 2 strokes together, and yet we were all good rowers, but only on flat water.
Yeah.
So, right, well, I would like to thank you very much, both for your presentation and also for answering all my questions today and other people's. It's a fascinating area, and I think the level at which you've taken it to is something, is really a long way from where lots of other people are at the moment. So I'm sure lots of people found it really fascinating. So thank you very much indeed. And as it's the end of this morning's session, I want to thank everybody else who has also contributed with their answers and also their presentations. I want to remind you that the second session will be at 1700 hours Central European time today, and that's to the other half of our speakers who will also do their presentation, who will also be on the panels this afternoon. And please, if you have any questions, either at the time or beforehand, if you send them in to us or you write them in the question and answers, then our wonderful speakers will make every attempt to answer them for you. So thank you very much indeed, everyone, and thank you for turning up on a Saturday morning to listen to all of us. And we look forward to seeing you again. Just to remind you as well that there are 2 more video presentations that will be uploaded tomorrow, which is the final day of the World Rowing Virtual Coaches Conference. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Lars. And bye.